welcome to our channel. Tonight we have Santos Bonacci. Rhett's going to join us here in a few minutes. He's just finishing his dinner. So, yeah, here he is actually. Okay, you broke up for a minute there, but you're good now?
Yeah.
Did you hear that question, or should I repeat that?
Yeah, repeat, please.
Yeah, so my friend Joey's asking, why is it permissible to smoke cannabis if we can't remember our dreams? He says it seems the function of the pineal gland is to have those visions and those dreams. I guess that was part of his experience where he woke up 4 days after smoking cannabis and he was able to have these clear dreams or something. So I don't know what your experience is with that. But.
Yeah, well, I take cannabis daily, so and I recommend it because it's the preferred biblical incense that God requires to be. So in the Bible, God asks that cannabism be offered as incense to Him. So it's showing already the stature of this plant as a divine plant. If God, the God of the universe, is asking for cannabism, and this is 5 times in the Bible, it's not once, it's not a mistake, it's 5 times, and this is cannabis. So it's a holy plant.
Okay.
Because theogen, meaning that it gives you theos, God mind. You have a divine, you divinize through cannabis. That's how I got all my syncretism. I got every single syncretism. Of course, I say this in all my presentations, all my interviews. I never do anything straight, and I'm on cannabis right now.
Yeah,
because
Well,
I want to shut this world out. I want to do syncretism. I'm devoted to syncretism, and cannabism is God's best plan to divinize the mind.
So is that affecting your dreams or anything?
Yeah, it can if it becomes toxic. You don't want to be abusive of it. I mean, I'm regular, but I'm a very, very moderate consumer of anything. I've never been into alcohol. I've never been into tobacco. Well, I did. I smoked for 5 years when I was younger. Tobacco. But I don't have any addictions. It might look like I've got an addiction when I'm, having a bit of a puff. But because I do it regularly, but I also eat and drink regularly, and I have to.
Okay.
So I do not allow it to become toxic. I do not allow it to be something of abuse. It's something of use.
I think a lot of that has to do with your state of mind when you're partaking of it too. So, if you're doing it to abuse it, of course, you should probably work that out. But if it's like a sacred thing to you, I think that's if you're doing it with the mentality of this helps me connect with God, I don't see an issue with that at all.
Yeah, of course. You have to do everything in a sacred light. Everything. All your deeds must be sacred. It's the only way to ascend.
Right. So Craig's asking, what do you believe about the afterlife? And I think I remember seeing you talk about this through like some of the Hindu where you have the picture of the different levels of heaven. And then like, what are we and what happens to us after we die? So,
well, there is really no such thing as death. Death is a composite of 2 words, door and ether. Death is the door to the ether.
wow. Yeah.
Because our soul is bound by 4 elements. plasma, gas, liquid, solid, which in astrology and the Platonic solids elements are fire, air, water, and earth. So we know our body is this. We know that. So when the body has finished its use to ascend the soul and improve the soul atoms during the course of a life, then it returns to the ether and has to go through the doorway, the portal to the ether, because it's the quintessence, the fifth element that modern science has eliminated. They've eliminated the ether that all the philosophers said was the elixir of life, was the essence of the divinity. Right. And all scriptures say this. So death is door ether. And so you're returning to your unconditioned state in the ether. Here we are conditioned. Mm-hmm. Right now, as I say this, I'm looking south to California from Oregon, and I'm beholding Mount Shasta. Right?
Yeah, so, I'm familiar with that drive.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's beautiful.
Right. So how is that, like, that would be represented by, like, the solstices, I guess, on the zodiac. This is the gate of the gods and the gates of men. And then how would that translate into, like, the Bible story? Because I kind of connected that through the Exodus story, where they enter into the promised land. I would almost see that as sort of representing that transition from death to life, or from the wilderness period into the heaven. Or I guess how would you picture the wilderness period in the Bible as it relates to our journey?
Well, the wilderness is the cycles of necessity that our soul goes through. When we incarnate and have torus field bodies full of atoms, anatomy, then this is all an experience. This is all a life where we have an opportunity to ascend, to improve the essence of the being. And so the wilderness is the soul's journey through incarnation. It's a wilderness because there's obstacles in the wilderness. There's death. There's danger. There's harm in the wilderness. And whereas when we go home to our natural unconditioned state, nothing can harm us. There's no fear. There's only love.
Right.
Yeah. And so we don't want to be in the wilderness. We want to get baptized and enter the promised land. The promised land is in the head, the pineal gland. See, when you go through the wilderness, you're going up the spinal column and raising the christic fluids so that they can be reinstated in the head, heaven heaved up. Mm-hmm. Heaven, the promised land is here. The land flowing with milk, pituitary gland, and honey, pineal gland.
So that's the chrism, right?
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to ask you, Santos, where did you first hear about this? Did you maybe get it as some sort of like a revelation that hit you? Or did you hear about it from someone else first? Because that has always fascinated me about your videos. It's actually my favorite thing to listen to you talk about is the chrism and the kundalini energy going up the spine. And I'd love to hear you talk on that if you wouldn't mind.
Well, there is a process whereby the nervous system is transformed in the human organism. And when this happens, one becomes christened with the chrism, the cerebrospinal fluid, which is the oil or the lord or the lard. The oil is the lard, and lard gives you lord. And so when you follow the Lord, you are following the process of elevating the chrism so that you can have more charisma And what happens is you are now providing the materials for the cerebrum to generate a 13th cranial nerve. And it's called the Christ nerve. So you have your 12 cranial nerves, and the materials come from the cerebrospinal fluids. And if those are ejected during the course of sex, then those materials are being squandered. In fact, one becomes a degenerate when they ejaculate. Yep.
Okay.
All right, so Santos, my question was, where did you first hear that? And how did you come up with this whole ideology based on that? Because you seem to have a very deep understanding of it. And I'm sure, you know, after years of studying it, but where did you first hear it?
From a man called Samael Aumweor from Colombia, who teaches the perfect matrimony. There's a book called The Perfect Matrimony. And he studied ancient literature from all around the world and ancient theologies, and discovered that they were all based on this process, a 12-year process of transforming the nervous system. And also there's another writer, George Carey. He writes about this in the word God-man, in the book God-man, the Word made flesh. And so what you have is the true story of Christianity, which is how we not only ascend the human condition by transforming the nervous system, by keeping it clean. This is why vaccinations, chemtrails, and all of this dental work with mercury, etc., is harming people, because its intention is to sabotage and destroy the human antenna system, the tree of life, from operating at its maximum, and hence people become they get Alzheimer's, dementia, etc., because the nerve endings have been fried. And these are the nerve endings that should have been growing, not fried. And even if you don't develop the 13th cranial nerve, which is called the Christ nerve, which gives you access to all the Akashic records and all of your power and all of your glory and divinity, even should you not get to that, because it has to do with white tantra, which is sexuality, and it has to be 12 years with the same partner, as in a perfect matrimony, a holy matrimony, where they both enable the nervous system to ascend, to transform, metamorphosize.
So it's a partnership in a way, like with someone that's holy to you.
Yeah, Thomas H. Burgoyne says that you can only do this with the one partner. And so promiscuity is the left-hand path, and pure white tantric sex will be the right-hand path. Celibacy is in the middle. Celibacy is just nothing other than stagnancy, where the sexuality is not used to raise those fluids to provide the materials for the cerebrum to do its work, to transform the nervous system, because the human nervous system is way more advanced than the animals, and it has to do with the development of the new nervous system, what will be the consciousness of the individual. So anyone who has nerve damage or who has weak nerves, etc., that will affect their consciousness.
So how old is this teaching? Like, did these guys get it from the Zoroastrians?
Yes. Zoroastrians thought that anyone who premeditatively committed an ejaculation would eternally be damned.
Wow.
There's no salvation for anyone who says, well, I'm going to have an ejaculation now. They are eternally damned unless they stop and repent, because they have to stop destroying the nervous system and depleting their brains. You see these people who ejaculate all the time, masturbating and just ejaculating like
Pornography. Yeah.
You see they are depleted. You know, they don't have any charisma because they don't have any chrism.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then they set about preventing young men from destroying their lives by ejaculating, and they would set up seminaries where they will learn about seed retention in this.
Wow. I never put that together.
Yeah.
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 So there's a reason why there are seminaries.
Yeah. Okay. So I think our listeners would want to know this as well. Have you put this into practice in your own personal life, and what has that brought about? Like, what are the effects of putting this into practice and actually making this a lifestyle?
Well, I started learning about this in 2007, and then built up with my then Japanese wife partner, built up developing this and developing how to learn how to do an implosion orgasm so that there is no loss of minerals, there is no loss of life force. Because during that 5 years, I was noticing, because I'd learned how bad and detrimental the ejaculation was, not only physically but spiritually, everlastingly harmful, that I was paying attention and noticing that every time I ejaculated, because I was doing grey tantra, not white tantra, which is no ejaculation. Grey tantra is occasional ejaculation, and then black tantra is only ejaculation. And so I was noticing that I would feel depleted, tired, devastated, annoyed, irascible, argumentative, depressed, empty, unfulfilled. The only time you feel fulfilled is when you have your orgasm, which is not supposed to be ejaculated. It's supposed to be imploded. And there's a technique and a way to do this. It has to be developed. So I did this for 5 years, and then 2012, after suffering enough of the horrible effects of ejaculation, totally sacrilegious and blasphemous activity, I started on the pure path, and now I'm enjoying white tantra when I have a partner. I have had another partner since my Japanese wife, and so yeah, I've been doing that, and I will never return to the ejaculation lifestyle. I'm 56 and I'm the healthiest man I know. I've recently made a great recovery from parasites and restored my health. I'm the happiest I've ever been. As I said, I'm healthy. I don't have any problems with me. No diseases. No syndromes. I'm still doing the parasite protocols, animal dewormer called fenbenzidole and ivermectin. That saved my life and restored my health. And now I'm happy, settled. I'm not frustrated anymore.
Hey guys.
So I know.
Hey,
Hey, Santos.
how was your day?
Hey, how you going, man? Pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
Apparently, everyone's got beanies but me. Hold on, I can fix
Oh, I
that.
love my beanies. Yeah, we got the beanie theme. I'm gonna have some water, and then so there was a couple of questions that we got cut
Whatever.
off before you could hear them, so I might kind of go through those again, and then we can just continue. And I'd like to kind of focus on some of the Bible stuff too, because it's always fun to review that, and that's.
Hey, Kevin, before you get into that real quick, have you explained to Santos exactly like what we're doing on this channel or anything like that?
No, like how much do you know about our show on YouTube, Santos? Have you seen anything for it or?
No.
No, okay.
Well, we're interviewing some pretty, well, honestly, like the biggest names we can get in experts in their field when it comes to mythology, astrotheology, fringe science, and all of the stuff, all of their subject matter concerning pretty much the Bible and religion and different views on eschatology, the end times, and what it is to be human. And we're really doing a deconstruction of Christianity, any religion really.
Mm-hmm.
We're finding that Christianity has ties with many different mythological pastimes, and which is what brings us to you, Santos, is you have syncretism down to a T. It's an art and a science for you, and that's why we were really excited to get you on the show. I've been a fan of yours for years. I've commented on a few of your YouTube videos. I'm really excited to have you here. And I know that I'm speaking for all of MythVision when we say it's a privilege to have you on the show today.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just share how I found out about you. I was actually in a Facebook debate group, and I was still a Christian, and I was looking at full preterism versus the Israel-only view of eschatology, and we were.
Have you heard of either of those, Santos?
Of Jewish eschatology?
Yeah, there's a couple different views that are getting popularized today. There's preterism, which is pretty much that everything's fulfilled, but it still applies to everybody. And this is all concerning the Bible and the gospel. And then there's Israel only, which is the statement that everything in the Bible, everything written in the Bible was only for covenant Israel and has nothing to do with anybody else. They both have good points. They both have bad points, in my opinion. But have you heard of those?
Yes, more or less. But there's many eschatologies, and all the religions have their, perspective of it, and they all have their understandings. And I think they're all limited because, for a start, Israel has nothing to do with a genetic race. It has to do with a spiritual race. The Israel of God is God's chosen people, the Brahmins.
See, I agree with that, but the Israel-only movement would say, no, I'm sorry, Santos, you're wrong. You've misinterpreted the scriptures. It's all about covenant Israel and the nation of Israel 2,000 years ago. What would you say to that? Because I deal with these people every day. And to be honest, it's really hard for me to keep my cool sometimes with them because, to me, it's quite obvious that whoever wrote the Gospels meant for it to be for everybody. I mean, I think that's pretty clear in the literature, but they have their ways, and I'm sure Kevin could tell you as well that it's pretty clear that they believe this is only for national Israel 2,000 years ago.
Well, yeah, they're trying to save people from the Bible's doctrines by saying, "Oh no, this was for them," and they do that by looking at the time statements in the Bible.
Yeah.
So when I was in this debate group, somebody actually told me about you, Santos, and it was talking about the ages, the ages of the great year, And that's when I figured out, wait a minute, this is all astrotheology, because it's talking about these ages. And if you look at the time statements, it lines up with the end of the age of Aries and the beginning of the age of Pisces. So that was a big switch for me, to go from this kind of literal historical view to more of this ancient astrology view, which really helped me, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's the problem, Santos, is a lot of these Israel-only guys are actually biblical literalists that take everything as literal history. And I'm wondering where you stand on that point.
Well, this is it. I mean, the esoteric Jews, they know that it's not. You know, Moses ben Moses of the 11th century in Spain wrote much on this, that he ridiculed people who took their writings literally. He said, such is just a fool, you know, because these are cloaks that you put on a garment. You must take off the cloak and see what is inside the garment. In other words, this is not written on a level of, you know, literalism. It's a literary work, and it's a work
Santos,
that
real quick,
elevates the mind.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Are you aware that Paul himself, I don't remember exactly which letter it is, but he says that anyone who thinks the resurrection is a physical event is a fool. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the resurrection is the resurrection of your Christ nature. We have a subtle body and a higher mind, and if we don't ever get in tune to it, we'll always be trapped in the carnal mind. And so you've got to resurrect. So you've got to let the dead bury their dead, because they're not going to resurrect. Inside of you, you have what is like a Christmas tree. It's your cerebrospinal nervous system, and it's your purpose here, if you want to ascend, to nourish it and keep it electrical, you know, the nerves, the nervous system, because that's your Christ in you. And when that evolves, you can actually evolve your nervous system. You can grow a 13th cranial nerve. You can strengthen your nervous system. You can grow new wiring in your nervous system. And that's what you're supposed to do. But if you've got vaccines with mercury, formaldehyde, and dentist work with mercury in it, and chemtrails with all these toxins in it, well, then those attack the nervous system. And see, this is where Alzheimer's and autism and dementia is coming in, and multiple sclerosis. It's because of the debilitated nervous system. And this is deliberately
Santos,
done.
When you mentioned the 12th cranial nerve, and you said you can evolve a 13th, is it possible, in your opinion, to evolve past a 13th even, and maybe to a 14th and a 15th? How does that work, and can you explain that?
Well, I don't know about that, but once you reach the 13th nerve, you have all you want. You now have your full Christmas tree. Your subtle body is complete. You've done the work. You've been rewarded, and so you'll never return to another state. Once you reach a high state, why would you return back to a former state? You know, would a 6-year-old child return back to his 3-year-old toys? He just laughs at his 3-year-old toys.
Is 13 a sacred number?
Yes, it is.
Is 13 significant? Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, it is. Of course, because it's the number 4. It's the second number 4. It's the 4 is a positive 4. Well, the second number in that sequence, 13, will be a negative 4. So, but it's still 4, and 4 is the number of death. Just ask the Japanese. So 13 being a negative 4 is always very well. It's a tricky number. You know, it can have luck.
What do you mean by that? How is 13 a negative 4? Can you explain that?
Well, because in the series, it always goes positive, negative, neutral, transient, a transitional. So, in other words, there are 12 numbers in the universe. Many say there are 9. Well, they are correct as well. But they're leaving out the 3 transitional numbers at the end, 10, 11, 12. So you have trinities, 4 trinities of numbers. The first three numbers, 1, 2, 3, are positive. 4, 5, and 6 are mimicking 1, 2, and 3. They are the same thing, but they are negative 1, 2, and 3. 7, 8, 9 are neutral 1, 2, and 3. And 10, 11, 12 are transitional. And so in a series, the first number is always the positive one. And then the second one will be negative. So that's why 13 gets the bad rap. It's more negative than 4, which is the number of death, the number of the 4 elements that have given you your body of death. You've died here from your true spiritual unconditioned nature in heaven. You've come here to die. You're dense.
Well,
Kevin, what do you think that has to do with the number, you know, in the Bible in Revelation? It says, you'll know
well, I was just
Antichrist,
reminded.
the number.
Yeah, I was reminded of like the 13 cycles of the moon, or where every 12 months, I guess, you have to replace the a month, and every 33 years to make up for the difference between the sun and the moon cycle. So I thought that might have something to do with this number 13, with the lunar calendar and the solar calendar, but I don't know. That was just a theory I had. I didn't hear it anywhere or anything, but because like Judas might be like the 13th disciple who gets betrayed maybe at the end of the year for right before the sun goes into the solstice and dies and rises. So
True.
To me, it would have to be something. It seems to happen chronologically in the Gospels where Judas gets betrayed. He's almost like the 13th.
And didn't Paul see himself as the 12th, the actual, like the real 12th disciple?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, yes, he didn't consider himself of the 12, but he was an apostle. So the apostles were 12, but that's because the apostles means that the apostles, the posts of El, and those posts were 12 zodiacal signs, you see. So
wow,
the 13th is always having to do with yeah. And the same with disciples. They are disciples. You see, if you want to be disciplined in whatever you do, you have to know the cycles. You have to know how nature works. It's cyclical. And if you don't understand how those cycles work, they always start in Aries and finish in Pisces and have 12 conditions along the ecliptic of every wave, then you don't know anything about waves. You think waves are positive and negative.
I know Kevin had a question about that. The whole disciples thing. Kevin, would you want to elaborate on that?
Well, like, what do you mean exactly by discs? Because I think you might have even just clarified it. Because is the discs?
Well, the disc is the wheel of astrology. There's no other disc. That's the disc.
Right.
The disc is the wheel of astrology. The 12 posts, the 12 gods.
Yeah.
In Strong's Concordance. In Strong's Concordance,
and how does that etymology work? Like where did you hear?
Sorry?
How did you hear about the wording for that? Like, how did you?
Yeah, is that etymology? How did that go? How did disc go from the original languages into the English like that? How does disc?
Yeah, how did it
in
go?
English?
How did you get disc from disciple? Was that in history, or was that before Christianity?
Because that's how disciplined ones were. They were disciplined. All right. So what was?
Okay. So I guess I'm asking for you, Kevin, if you don't mind. So the whole disciple thing, I've heard you say that before in a couple of your videos, and I'm wondering, and the etymology of the word disc. That's an English word, and of course we think of a disc when we hear the word disc, but disciple was translated from the Hebrew and the Greek. So how does the meaning of the word disc in English translate from the Hebrew and the Greek to actually back up what you're saying there. Is what I mean is in the original languages when they're talking about the disciples, it makes sense in English to us, but did it make sense at the same time in the Hebrew and the Greek?
Oh yeah, of course. They all syncretize. They might not use the word disc, but you'll find it will return. It will always be rooted in the word cycle. See, when Jesus is walking on the circuit of Galilee with his 12 apostles, you go to Strong's Concordance, and it tells you that that circuit of Galilee is the circuit of the zodiac, the ecliptic of the zodiac, which the Greeks talk about. So there you go. Thank you, Strong's. Thank you. We know that Jesus is the sun on the ecliptic because you're telling us. You know, they tell you.
Interesting.
It's just the people.
So it's like we got the word disc from that. The word disciple actually comes from a circuit based on the zodiac.
Well, it's in the
Yeah, it's always. Look at the word.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kevin.
Well, are you interpreting based on like how it's being used in the story, like with the word Galilee, and then you see the big picture and you realize, oh, this whole thing is based on the zodiac. Therefore, you're making sense of this word disciple. That's what's happening, right? That's a syncretism.
Yeah.
And so you're saying, in other words, Santos, that's what the writers
this is the thing
of the Gospels had in mind.
Well, yeah,
Did you hear that?
Well, that's what it's all about. When you know what the Bible is really all about, you'll see what these words, and some of them badly translated, you'll just know you have the keys to understanding it. They're not that difficult at all. You know, once you understand that it's based on your body, man is the measure of the universe, and the ecliptic runs straight from the fontanelle straight through your perineum, and then reaches the bottom chakra at your feet, and that's the ecliptic of the sun. It goes through your body, and there's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, all the way down to the 2 feet, Pisces, the 2 feet, the 2 fish.
So that's awesome.
And so the ecliptic is a man. It's known to be a man, and that man's called Adam Kadmon.
So I have a question that got cut off last time. It was we were talking about the raising of the chrism and this experience that you can have basically where you reach a state of happiness or joy. And my question is, like, how did it begin? Do you think, did somebody experiment with this on themselves and then write the mythology for it? Or I guess it would have had to have happened experientially before it happened, before people actually understood how it worked.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Santos, what part did DMT play in that? Because I know that you're privy to dimethyltryptamine as well.
Well, yeah, and like the
well, in theory, go on.
Yeah, well, the yogi. I just was listening to these yogis, and they talk about the 2 paths: one of devotion and one of knowledge. So it sounds like you can almost raise your chrism without actually understanding how that's happening. So, like in the
but the thing is, there was training about raising the chrism in the seminary. You see, that's why, as I said in last week's show, that's why young men were sent to seminaries to learn how to practice semen retention, you know, and to learn how to utilize it to make a 13th cranial nerve. So it was serious business, and they took it great pleasure and responsibility in following this science because people were getting enlightened. So I think I answered your question there, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Kevin, if you don't mind, I had a question for him that I have been thinking about over the last couple of days. So the signs of the zodiac and the ages pertaining to the Gospels themselves, because that's kind of what we're focused on here is understanding the biblical literature, what it means for us today, how to apply it. Jesus represents the age of Pisces. Now, my understanding in the ecliptic, which is working backwards through the zodiacal signs, Pisces is the final age before, Pisces actually in backwards working through on the ecliptic cycle, Pisces would be the first because it's right after Aries, right? If you're going backwards to the ecliptic. So what does that represent for us today?
Yep.
Have we moved into, were the Gospels trying to alert us as humanity? We're moving into a new age. And what does that imply? And do you have anything to speak to concerning that?
Well, yes, it's coming into the age of Aquarius because this is a precessing cycle. In other words, it goes contrary to the other movements. The flow of the year, for instance, the sun is always going Aries, Taurus, Gemini. It's not going backward. It's not going Aries, Pisces, Aquarius. But the big cycle is precessing. It does go backwards. And so, yeah, Pisces has had its day, really. It's probably all snuffed out. Probably a little bit more to go, and that might be till the end of next year, the 21st of December 2020, where both Jupiter and Saturn will be 0 degrees Aquarius, right on the cusp between Capricorn and Aquarius, which are Saturn's ruling signs. And when they are there, 0 degrees, which hasn't happened for a long, long time. Possibly the last time was a couple of thousand years ago when they both were conjunct in Pisces, same position, 0 degrees. They say that it was not 0 degrees. I think it was 7 or 8 degrees, but nonetheless, this 0 degrees is very, very, very interesting. It's going to be, it will be a significant day. I don't know what might happen. I might have to look into it a bit more, check out the other aspects in the chart, but that alone tells you that something special about Aquarius is coming, and that's going to usher in the new age, I believe.
And what do you think that new age entails, though? I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just wondering, Santos.
Well, it's going to be an age.
We're interviewing you. I wanted to get your input on what do you think the new age, we're moving from Pisces, which would be the first sign on the backwards movement on the ecliptic. Pisces was the beginning of something. We're now moving into Aquarius, and I'm wondering what you think that means for humanity.
Well, it'll be an age of enlightenment. The waters are not an element of thinking. Air is an element of thinking. And they are mental signs and spiritual. So there's going to be a link between the intellect and spirituality, the knowledge-based spirituality, scientific spirituality, which is what Syncretism teaches. I mean, Syncretism really has returned. It's been snuffed out in the Renaissance times. It was snuffed out in the Hellenic times. And it's been really attacked. And so that kind of stuff can happen, say, in the age of Pisces, but it won't happen in Aquarius because the knowledge will be abundant, as it says in Scripture. Yeah. The day will come when the knowledge of the true God will be filled all earth.
Yes, and that actually reminds me of a verse in the Gospels where Jesus himself says, there comes a day when you will no longer ask me for anything. And I kind of see that playing out where we're realizing our divinity, in a sense. We're one with God. We've always been one with God, in my opinion. But we're starting to learn that fact and understand our true origins and our true identity as one with everything else. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yep, for sure. That's what's going on.
Yeah, you look at the language of the New Testament, and it says, "You shall no longer teach your neighbor anything," because the truth is going to be obvious, and that's, I think, what's going to be happening. The more science advances, and
Yeah.
we actually become more holistic, and with our science. And
So what
Yeah.
happened then, in your opinion, Santos? What happened if people had this knowledge in the first century? I mean, do we blame this all on the Dark Ages and the burning
Yeah.
of all these libraries?
Well, I guess you would blame them on the enemies of this knowledge, people who can't afford to have an enlightened humanity. And that would be the rich people, the very powerful rich people who control things at the top. And it would also be entities that control them from the transdimensional. And they would be demonic because they have to be, because generally benign
That's
beings
interesting
do
stuff.
not interfere.
That's interesting stuff to me. Can you explain, what's your understanding on this transdimensional reality we live in? I don't know if you had some questions lined up on that point, Kevin, but that fascinates me, especially with Santos, because Santos seems to have some innate knowledge that.
Well, my understanding through the Bible is that these entities are almost like thought forms, like the principalities. It talks about the powers and principalities of the air. I think it talks about it in Ephesians. So it's like, it almost sounds like this war of ideas, and those ideas might be thought forms, which are then called spirits. Just like ideas are metaphysical, so these things might be metaphysical. So I'm wondering.
That's what I mean. Santos, do you think that these entities have like a physical reality somewhere in a finer energy or something, or a finer matter? Like, do they actually physically exist, or is it really all in our minds? And like Kevin is saying, it's all us overcoming our thoughts.
Well, they don't physically exist, but they exist. It's like the file on your computer is full of pictures. Now, they don't physically exist in that file. They're in counter space. They're not spatial, but it's information that can be unraveled electrically, and then all of a sudden you've got pictures on your screen. So that's how they exist. They're not really in counter space, but their atoms are not physical in the sense that we can see them. They're spiritual atoms, and so they do have like a soul. They are ghosts, right? Or some of them are more powerful, but the soul factor is missing. You see, so they are entities. You could call them spirits, but there's no soul there. The soul is what then makes the body. So, and they're intelligent, and they're complete beings, and they have atoms of higher attenuation than our atoms.
So their atoms are vibrating at a higher frequency than ours are.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. And they exist. It's like the frequency of the information that's in your computer files, you know. Whenever you need that information, you know it's there. You reboot your computer and you can find it. And it's great information. It's voluminous, but it doesn't take up any space, you know. It's not, you'll never see it. You can't open have you seen Zoolander when he tries to get that file out of the computer, and he's hitting the computer trying to break it open to find the file that has all the information he needs? Well,
Zoolander.
This is it.
Yeah. So what do you think about like deliverance ministries in like the Christian charismatic church?
Well, they're all corporate. They're money-making schemes, and they teach that Jesus is literal and he's coming back, he'll never be able to come back out of the pages of the Bible where he was born and returns in literature, you know. So waiting for him is futile. They've turned like a nursery rhyme for adults called a gospel into literal history. So if you want to swallow it that way, that's fine. You know, it's fine if people want a literal Jesus savior, you know.
Santos, on that exact matter you're speaking to right now. So Jesus himself said that, you know, he's speaking to his contemporaries, to people living in his time, in his generation. And he says, some of you standing here will not pass away before you see the Son of Man return in his glory. What does that mean to you?
Well, because in this incarnation, you have a chance of seeing Christ if you do the good works, you know, before you die. If you die, then you'll have to do it in the next life. But he's saying some of you are good enough. You will see the Christ before you die. You know, I can see that you're at the level, and that Christ must be awakened in you, a la Colossians 1:27, the Christ that dwells in you.
Okay. Have you heard of the Creating Christ franchise? It's kind of picking up popularity right now. It's based on the fact that the Romans created the myth of Jesus, and that they wrote into the Jewish history that there would be a person that was coming, and it would be Vespasian, which actually, historically, Vespasian did fulfill all of what Jesus prophesied. So what do you think about that? Because that honestly has been a huge topic on our channel.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, look, okay, this is how it works. When the Julians corporatized Rome, Julius Caesar, the Julian lineage lasted about 70, 80 years. About 80 years. And so Julius Caesar is the original Jesus Christ from the Roman perspective. They just changed it. You see, both died on the Ides of March, but one passed the Rubicon, one passes the Jordan, one gets betrayed by Brutus, the other by Judas. One goes to Copernicum, one goes to Canal. One, it's the same story. Then when Vespasian, so the Julio-Claudians lasted up until the Flavians. Now, remember,
the Flavians.
It was at that time that Flavius Josephus, wrote this doctored history of the Jews and made them literal. The Jews were always the high Brahmin caste. Jews were always people who, were elevated of consciousness, and so they didn't have a nation. They've never had a nation, you see. And so, because this is not for them to have a nation. It's not for philosophers to, be material in that sense only. You see, so when the Flavians came, they did the same trick. They needed a god. They needed the son of God, Titus, who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. And so now the Flavian dynasty is deified, and now they are legitimate, you see, because now Vespasian, who killed Vitellius, the last of the Julio-Claudians, now is God. And he did miracles in Rome, and he resurrected people.
Sure. And he
Titus
fulfilled everything that Jesus said. Yeah. So that's what my question is then, Santos. Could this all be the Gospels? Put aside the writings of Paul, but the Gospels themselves, the synoptics, could they be a corporate political agenda to quell the Jews, or is there something deeper going on here, or is it both? And that really, my question to you is, what do you think about that situation going on right there? Because there's esoteric knowledge in the Bible, there's no doubt. But did the Romans have some kind of inner road into that? Sorry, did you hear that question? Did the Romans have some kind of...
Well, look, it's like this. Go on.
No, that was my question is...
Sorry.
It appears to me from everything, you know, I'm a pastor's kid. I've studied this my whole life. I've kind of found the literalist historical view quite lacking. And I'm on a truth for knowledge here, which what our whole page is about. And that's why we've invited you here today, because you have a perspective that still holds to an esoteric truth being communicated through the Gospels. Do you think that even though that may be the case, there's an esoteric truth being perpetuated through the Gospels, that the Romans could have created this whole thing out of whole cloth?
No, that's where guys like Joseph Atwill, I think, have gone wrong. The Romans appropriated themselves of the Gospels. Of course, people were writing Gospels and adoring Gospels. They're art. They're literal. It's like Shakespeare. The Bible's like Shakespeare. So it was preserved for many thousands of years. And the Romans just came along and appropriated themselves of it and made it a corporate Bible. 2 bulls, and they are papal bulls. An Old Testament, which is a bull, and a New Testament, which is a bull. That's why it's a Bible. And it has, bull means to speak, bol. It's speaking.
How much of,
and so
just wondering, adding to your question, Rhett, like how much of Josephus is actually metaphorical as well then? Because like in the Bible you have like this metaphorical city which is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt and even Jerusalem, whereas there's the Jerusalem below in Galatians 4 and the Jerusalem above. So is the destruction of the Jerusalem then a symbolical story as well? And then in Josephus even...
No, it's literal, but
right.
It's literal because there's many Jerusalems. There's every nation is the Holy Land. It's not just Israel. It's just that the scriptures that they've preserved were based on gospels centered around that mystery school in Jerusalem because it was such a fine mystery school. But the stories they have are the same in China, in India, in the Mayans. They're all the same story. It's all exactly the same. All you have to do is do some comparative studies and you'll see that they're all exactly the same story. It's a sun god. He's got 12 heroes. He does all these heroic things and he's a savior and he gets crucified and Krishna's this, Horus is this. It's all the same story because it's based on the eclipse. It's based on the sun. And they used to preserve this.
You know, I actually think that's something that we tend to overlook when we're talking about the origins of the gospel and such. We tend to overlook that all these things are syncretistic in nature.
Right.
And we're trying to attribute it all to the Romans making up this story to quell the Jews, and that's where the Gospels came from. And maybe there is something there, but we're forgetting that this story is older than the Romans are. I mean, it goes back thousands, if not tens of thousands of years.
Well, yeah, how old is it?
Yeah, people are hoodwinked. It's not old. There's no old to it. It's timeless. These are timeless works.
Go ahead and continue, guys. I'll be right back. I'll be right back.
Yeah, so there's no use considering the age of these texts because they always get appropriated by the empire that turns up and then just grabs these sacred books and redacts them and brings them in line with their corporate agenda. So the Bible is what you said it was, that it is a book of control and etc., because it's been turned into that. It's like a knife that's used for killing that was once used for buttering bread, is now killing people because it was turned into that by evil intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much of Josephus is metaphorical? Because I know he talks about how this heifer gave birth to a lamb, and that seems to be clear imagery of the transition of the age from the age of Taurus or into the age of Pisces, or some sort of symbolism going on there. And then he has some stuff that, like Joseph Atwill is comparing to the Gospels and stuff like that. So did they take this sort of chronological history and then apply the astrotheology to it and then make the Gospels? Or did they look at the stars and then kind of make up this history about their temple? And then, because like in the Lord's Prayer, you have on earth as it is in heaven. So did it start like in the sky, or did this story kind of start on earth? Or
no, it starts in the sky, and then they translate it and transpose it onto the earth with their buildings, and then they call it a holy land, and it is. If you go to Glastonbury, you'll see a zodiac there. If you go to China, you'll see zodiacs there. All lands are holy lands. Why is Holland called Holy Land? Why is Israel means Isis Ra-Nel, the Holy Land? What have we got? We've got Venezuela, the land of Venus, which is the Holy Land. America, that's Mercury, to the feathered Quetzalcoatl, America. China, the land of Qi energy, holy energy. Japan, the land of the rising sun, it's the Holy Land. The Netherlands, the netherworld, is the Holy Land. Norway, the land of the north, because the North Pole, the head, is where you go up to be holy. You know, Finland, the land of finesse, the finished people, polished, ready for ascension. England, the land of angels. England, the land of angels. It's all the Holy Land. Ariland, the land of Aries, the Lamb of God. Right. I can go on and do every land. It's all the Holy Land because God made it.
Yeah, because I'm from half Swedish, so they got the cross on their flag as well. So they got it's like the golden cross, but that was probably
all right, I'm back, guys. What did I miss?
Well, that's a good example. Sweden, the land of Eden.
Right. Wow, I didn't think about that.
Everywhere you go, it's the Holy Land.
We're talking about flags now?
Yeah.
No, we're talking about lands.
Oh, lands.
Well,
okay,
yeah,
so we're sticking with the
I was asking about
syncretistic view.
Yeah, I was asking like where it started did it start in the stars or did it start on the land? Because Jesus is like maybe on earth as it is in heaven. So he was just giving all these examples of how it's the promised land because they take the stellar mythologies because the star is the most obvious map we have to govern our lives, at least at that time.
Oh, wow. So are you guys on the track of that's where the nations came from, was a mimic of the stars?
All of them. Every nation is copying the stars. You know, even all the towns we have, they're all stellar. You know, Amsterdam, the land of Amster is the star of Om. You know, Rotterdam, the land of Ra. London, Elondon, the Lord, the Sun. Manchester, Chester is the star. Rochester, it's all stars, you know. It's all they're all named like this. The Holy Land, California.
What about America?
We've got
Well, he
Well,
said
I
that.
did that before. So California, we've got Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Juan, Santa Clara. This is all Sacramento, the land of the sacraments. Everywhere you go. Oregon, the land of gold. Name any word, and I'll show you how it goes back to the stars.
What do you think of Metatron?
Duck. Does duck go back to the stars?
Duck?
Yes, like
Which one?
a duck. It's not a land. It's just an animal.
Well,
do the animals come from the stars?
Yeah, it does.
It's just a question.
Yeah, all words come from the stars. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm just saying if the nations come from the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yep. So do words, of course. Because
so
words.
do you see star? Sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
What do you think of the word Metatron? I think it was a position in the temple, or it was an angel. I think we've had it mentioned on our channel, but somebody was asking. They said you believe in Metatron, but they don't know what you think it is. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, Metatron is it's a transcendental, archetypal, like a blueprint. Metatron is in the atomic nature of things. It's a structure. It's like the flower of life. It's like the Kabbalistic tree. It's an etheric.
It's a station that can be filled.
A physical thing, and it's
Richard Carrier said that it's an office. It's not a name. It's not a pronoun of an angel. It's not the name of an angel. It's an office that an angel can fill.
Or a priest, maybe, or something like that. Yeah. So do you like?
Yeah. So this.
Oh, you go ahead if you want.
No, you go. I wasn't really going to say anything significant, but
well, I was just talking.
You can go to the next question.
Like we talked. Sometimes you come across strong, and you're gonna experience everlasting hell for ejaculating, and I'm just wondering what you mean by that, and are you talking in metaphors, or are you trying to just get across the discipline that's required, or something like that, to that effect?
Yeah, if I might add to that too, Santos, is hell a literal place to you, or is it a state of mind? Because in my understanding, heaven and hell are within. According to what Jesus himself said, the kingdom of God is within you, he said to the Pharisees. It's not something you can observe. It's not going to show up on your doorstep. It's something that is within you that you need to realize. Is hell the same way in your understanding?
Yeah, it's a condition. It's a condition first, then it's a place. So it can become a place, yes, a dense place. But as for the other, this is what they used to teach in the seminaries. You know, the Zoroastrians and the original religions in their seminaries, that there is absolutely no forgiveness for wanton, deliberate ejaculation. There can be not.
Why?
We've lost this, you see.
Why?
And that's where.
Is it because of the chrism? Is that the basis of everything? Is raising your consciousness? And if you don't do everything possible to raise your consciousness, you're damned? That seems pretty harsh.
Well, ultimately, but it's not anyone condemning you. We have designed ourselves, but we were designed to enable everlasting life through these bodies. And how you do it is you never, ever deliberately ejaculate. That's it. If we taught young men and they could do it, which they can't because we're too feeble. But this is why celibacy was a thing. But celibacy is a stagnant way of using that fluid, whereas the proper way of ascending is through sex, but pure sex with no ejaculation. And after 12 years, those materials that you would have otherwise willy-nilly squandered with every whore and prostitute that comes along.
One second, Santos. How do you have sex?
Mm-hmm.
How do you have an orgasm without ejaculating? That's kind of like the definition of an orgasm is ejaculation, at least for men. I mean, how do you mentioned something last time we talked about an implosion orgasm. What exactly does that mean? And I know this is getting pretty graphic, and I hope our listeners are adult enough to have this conversation with us, but I'm interested because I have a mental image of what you mean, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, they're dry orgasms. There's no need for spillage of those vital fluids. And the effect of doing it is pretty palpable. I don't know whether anyone else feels the same way as I used to when I had ejaculations. It was devastating. Depression, all kinds of sick entities would come and interfere and affect your vibration. You would have to sleep. You're so tired and depleted. You'd feel some kind of an emptiness, a depletion of your vital forces. Now, when I have sex, I can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours and get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger every minute.
Woo!
Because it's vital force
for you.
Transmuted, and you transmute it, and those materials are what is used for the body to generate the 13th cranial nerve. The one who squanders them will never have that power of everlasting life and connection with the Akashic record forever and ever and ever.
All right.
Once they do
I just have to say,
and that's what they're
as someone who... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead, Santos. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I finished.
No, okay, so
I finished.
My question was, in my experience, and I've been married, and I totally believe in tantric sex, which is a uniting of one to another and becoming one flesh, and whatever that means. I believe I have felt that, and an ejaculation has not made me feel depressed or like I'm lacking something. It's made me feel, in much to the contrary, it's made me feel fulfilled and as if, but maybe that's because I was doing it right. I don't know what you're trying to say here, because every time I've had an orgasm, there's been ejaculation. So how do you have an orgasm without ejaculation? And what is this, Sasquatch of a thing you're talking about called an implosion orgasm? And how does one attain that? And why is that better than an external ejaculation?
Is that through meditation?
Well, when you learn how to do it, you'll see why. Sorry?
Is that through meditation and breathing exercises?
Yeah. Yep. And through certain techniques like squeezing the muscles of your perineum. That's it. Once you lightly touch on those, the energy goes up your spine rather than drained out of your body. You utilize it. It goes up. You can feel it, the orgasm, and you can control it. And you can have an orgasm for as long as you like, depending on how strong you are, to keep it down as it's coming up, because it will always.
Here's a Syncretism. I did Kundalini yoga for the first time this Monday morning. So I met this. So this guy teaches it basically professionally, and tomorrow he's doing he's training these people to do breathing exercises. So I'm volunteering as somebody to help somebody train somebody?
Through your breath,
Yeah.
you can do everything, because your breath is magic. It's magnetism.
Right.
And if you learn how to breathe, if I didn't learn how to breathe years ago, I'd be dead, because I was really, my health was just deteriorating due to not breathing properly. And I corrected a lot of things: my sleep, my mind. I slowed my mind down. I do a breathing technique where I just expand my lungs at the bottom, the diaphragm, and then mid-chest, and then shoulders. And I breathe into even into my fingers. You visualize it. And you breathe. When you do this breath, you are actually pushing breath into the cells and into the vital organs. You're just forcing it, more or less. You don't have to force. You just do it subtly. But you'll learn and you'll grow. It gets stronger and stronger. And then all of a sudden your diaphragm is like very responsive. You're feeling it, like by touch. It's very like direct connection. It's beautiful. Singers need to be connected with their diaphragm, but everyone should, really, because then you speak better. Your speech is nicer. It's more centered. You're more balanced in your thinking and more settled, so that your thinking is strong and you're channeling better thoughts. Breathing is you can maintain good health with good breathing.
Well, this is kind of a segue into my next question, because breathing is like the wind, right? So the word spirit in the Bible means wind, and so I'm wondering, okay, what do you think about those connections between the breathing exercises, meditation, and like in the Bible where it says go into your room, or look to the kingdom within you, seek first the kingdom, and some of the earlier even yoga practices, or even Buddhism, where you have identity and you're trying to attain to this state of nothingness, which is, you might describe as the wind or the air, as that's the nothingness, and that's maybe your identity. You're trying to identify with nothingness, or nirvana, and you're trying to overcome a state of like desire in Stoicism by identifying with maybe nothingness. So what do you believe?
Kevin, that is like brilliant stuff. Can you phrase that into a question real quick so that our listeners can grasp what you're saying right there?
Well, what do you believe about our identity? Like, what is our identity? Are we just awareness and consciousness, which needs to realize that about ourselves as nothingness? Or are we our thoughts? Should we identify ourselves according to our physical body? Or should we do like the Buddhists do and kind of attain nirvana in a sense?
Well, when you meditate, you don't identify with nothingness. You think of nothing other than the everything. You go to the everything when you meditate, because you're stilling yourself from the vibratory world, and you're going into the world of radiance. Different wave. The radial wave is different to the vibratory wave. So you're going into connecting to everything when you meditate. And if you don't do that, you'll never restore your power. If you don't meditate, you'll never restore your power, because you've got to get it from the stillness. It's not from making noise and thinking. It's from going into your heart. And the kingdom of God is in there, meaning that everything is in there. Everything, not nothing. So when you meditate, you go to the kingdom of God, which is everything. And these people who say, identify with nothingness, you can't do that. There's
all right,
no
Santos, back to the Gospels now. Back to the Gospels now, which is kind of the whole point of this interview. Did the writers of the Gospel understand this And are they trying to show us a way to attain divinity in ourselves? Honestly, the imagined world of Plato, where it's philosophers and scientists that rule the world, and we literally bring heaven to earth. Is that something that you see coming in our near future?
Yeah, for sure. And we are virtually the ones who are facilitating it through things like this interview. We are the ones who are enabling it and receiving it. We're all at different levels. There's no judgment. You know, some are still addicted to certain things. And that's fine, because the flesh is like this. But remember, the flesh is death, because this baptism of death, our bodies, needs to be resurrected. And so the resurrection happens
Santos,
when you resurrect your fallen nature, which means, you know,
I have a question on that for you. I'm sorry, I seem to be interrupting, but I'm interested is why. And I'm super happy to have you on this interview. You have no idea. I've looked up to you for many years. But when it comes to that, is there a way, I always, raised a Christian as a pastor's kid, and the Bible is just ingrained in my head. And I've had to try to find a way to integrate that into the knowledge I've accumulated over the past 10, 20 years. I don't think that everything the Bible says is true, but I do see pinpricks of like light, like someone poked a little tack through reality, and you can see pinpricks of light coming through. And one of these things is where, Paul says that all things are acceptable. Yes, you can do anything you want, but not all things are beneficial. And is he talking about this evolution, the raising of the kundalini, if we're going back to the Hindu, the raising of the kundalini up the spine to the cerebral cortex and realizing an evolution that we haven't understood yet?
Yeah, that's what it's talking about.
That was pretty vague.
When you say, yeah, well, but that's what the Bible's all about. When you say that I don't believe that what some of the Bible is saying is true, well, you can't say that, because it's not a book about literal things. It's transcendence, poems. You can't say a poem is not true, because it's about higher truth. So it's up to us to understand it. If we don't understand it and we take it literal, then it's not true, of course, because it wasn't meant to be. When you talk about the birds and the bees, you're speaking truth, but you're not truly speaking about birds and bees. So little kids will get confused, and they'll say, no, I'm sure Mum and Dad was speaking about birds and bees, not rabbits and chickens.
Right?
It was definitely literally birds and bees. I remember those two particular animals because they both started with B. No, child.
Yes.
No, it's talking about something else. But it's true. So you can't say the Bible's not. It's a book about truth, the highest truth, for the ones with eyes to see.
And ears to hear.
It's a gospel. You can't say a fairy tale, hasn't got truth in it. It's full of truths.
And I've been
all right. So back to the question of, where did this thing come from then? As far as I can tell, it's a bunch of Romans with the help of Josephus, who knew the Hebrew texts and what needed to be fulfilled for Israel to have a savior. How is this all syncretized? How does it all unite? Because there has to be a political agenda going on in the Gospels. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have them today. But yet there's something going on that's deeper than that. And what is that aspect? Is it just innate in us to always, even though we're trying to do something political, like as far as I can tell, the Gospels are political. Is there something innate in us that we always reach for the higher vibration? Is that what you're seeing? Because that's kind of what I'm understanding.
Yeah, well, that's the message in the scriptures. It's enabling the ascension process in us. It's encrypted. It's encoded. It's another language. It's the priestly language, the language of the Jews. That's why they're the chosen people, because a high-minded individual who is a Jew should know the keys and how to understand this encoded message so that we can get back to source. It's a book that's saying, if you want to get back to source, you have to, do this process, the good works, where you improve yourself, where you liberate yourself from this entanglement of your spirit in the fleshly world. Now, guys, I just realized I've only got a few minutes to go because, I was.
All right, Kevin.
Late.
I've got one more question for Santos then, and I'll let you have the final say. But Santos, all that said, what is your understanding of the Logos, and is the Logos representative of God? Is there some higher power that already knows everything, that wants us to attain what he has? And is that Logos informed by what we learn and go through in this life? Do we have a part to play in the final evolution of God?
Well, the Logos is from the monad to you, the Godhead, all the way to you, because it's the word of God. It's sound, sonoluminescence. So, in that sense, we.
So my question is, do we inform God? Is God living through us to learn about who he is? Is this all a big video game? Is that what's this whole thing we call life?
Well, yeah, more or less. God, the universal source, expands into the material world through electricity, the vibration, and makes forms, physical forms, and has a dance. Yeah, has a bit. Brahma breathes out, makes this beautiful world, and then breathes it back in again, and this is cyclical. It's a breath, and that's the Logos. And everything
so my
is
question
a Logos, fractal.
Is there a God? Is there someone up there dictating everything? Or are we a part of God's evolution? That's my question. Are we a part of God's evolution, or is there already someone up there pulling the levers and pushing the buttons, and we're just a part of his game, in your opinion?
Well, all is God. I mean, is there a God? For me, it's not a question. I don't hear it. It can't exist because all is God. This is God. But this is God in Malkuth, in the physical world. Then there's the transcendental world, and there's God there too.
What is Malkuth?
The world, the earth, the lowest part of the Kabbalistic tree, the earth. The ether is above, the kether, God. But it's all God. It's all expanded of God. It's like, does a drop of water ask whether the ocean exists? And yet it's part of the ocean. It's like, hey, man, I'm a drop of water, right? Does the ocean really exist? It's all is God. And so we are godlets. My nose is part of God's material world. That butterfly is part of God's thinking process. It's all interconnected. And so we are different to God, and we are God at the same time. It's a dichotomy. It's a paradox. It's a most blessed way to exist, to have your own individuality and activity, and to be God as well, which we are.
Let me rephrase that.
Yeah, but
do you believe that God has kind of siphoned himself into all these different parts, which we call individuality? Yes. And okay,
yes,
See, I believe that too.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Santos.
Yep.
I'll just ask you, how many books have you read?
Oh, I don't know, but I read enough to get what I've got, you know,
Right.
because the other half is intuition. And if you don't have the intuition and past life understandings and growth, when you come into this life and you incarnate, you don't bring a lot of that with you. You know, you've got to have a strong soul and bring it with you, your intuition, because you need that as well. But you must read the scriptures. That's why we wrote them, because they are the other half. This half, that half. And when you know how to use them both, you know, some people are too airy-fairy, conceptual, and you know, all about intuition and their way of seeing it. And it's like, I see it like this, and that's fine. Yeah, that's good. But how is it really in the world? You know, like if I have an orange, let's say I have an orange and there's a full moon, and I put the orange in front of my eye and I say to a little boy, you know what, this orange is bigger than that moon. And it's true, because it's relatively true, but it's not universally true. It's not absolutely true.
Subjective.
So that's why, a lot of it, you got to get it from both. So, you know, you get the books, read the books.
Would you be willing to do a debate with someone that might differ on your views?
I don't like doing debates, but if he's a cool guy and he's humble and he's not going to be arrogant, for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.